Have you ever noticed that, more often than not, the best results come precisely when we stop caring so much? Why do opportunities seem to arise when we are no longer desperately chasing them? And why does the peace we seek so much only appear when we give up trying to control it? This paradox haunts us. We spend our lives believing that we need to fight, plan, and worry to achieve what we desire. But what if the opposite is true? What if this obsession with control is precisely what keeps us from truly living? Michel de Montaigne, that brilliant and somewhat rebellious thinker, has an interesting answer to this. He lived in a turbulent time, lost friends and family to death, battled illness, and saw his life turned upside down. Yet, it was precisely when he stopped trying to control everything that he found a kind of freedom that few ever attain. Montaigne was not a preacher of absolute truths. On the contrary, his philosophy was an invitation to doubt, to experimentation, and above all, to detachment. He teaches us that by freeing ourselves from the need for certainty and control, we create space for something far more powerful: tranquility and authenticity. In this video, we will explore how Montaigne's philosophy can help us live without the burden of constant worry. We'll discover why caring less might actually be the secret to a lighter and, ironically, more meaningful life. As Montaigne himself asked, "What do I know?" Michel de Montaigne was born in 1533 in a France marked by religious wars, political intrigues, and instability. From an early age, his life was shaped by two opposing forces: privilege and tragedy. Born into a wealthy family, he received an exceptional education, mastering Latin in childhood and being exposed to the best ideas of his time. But no privilege can shield anyone from life's realities: loss, pain, and uncertainty. At the age of 30, Montaigne was forced to confront the brutality of existence in an intense and relentless way. His best friend, Etienne de la Boétie, died suddenly, leaving him devastated. Shortly after, his father also passed away, and then a bizarre accident took his brother's life. He was struck in the head by a tennis ball. As if that weren't enough, Montaigne himself had a near-death experience when he was thrown off a galloping horse, and to seal this phase of suffering, his newborn daughter died shortly after coming into the world. Imagine going through all of this in such a short time. Imagine feeling the world collapse around you, the fragility of existence becoming impossible to ignore. Montaigne could have gone mad. He could have surrendered to despair. But instead, he made a radical decision to abandon public life and retreat to his countryside estate, where he would spend years in contemplation and writing. In his private library, surrounded by more than 1,500 books, Montaigne found something that few ever do: a space for inner freedom. He realized that nothing in the external world could guarantee him stability or absolute security. The only thing he could truly control was his own mind, his way of seeing and reacting to the world. It was there, in the midst of silence and solitude, that he began writing his famous essays, texts in which he did not seek to teach absolute truths, but to explore his own experiences, mistakes, doubts, and contradictions. For Montaigne, self-knowledge was not a quest for perfection, but an ongoing exercise in accepting uncertainty. Montaigne discovered that much of human suffering comes from our illusion of control. We believe we can predict the future, avoid pain, and shape the world to our will. But the truth is, we have control over almost nothing. The secret to peace, he believed, does not lie in trying to control life, but in learning to coexist with its unpredictability. Montaigne's decision to withdraw from the world was not an act of resignation, but of liberation. He did not run away from life. He learned to live it in a way that made sense to him. Away from politics, social obligations, and the expectations of others, he found a space where he could simply be. And perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons we can take from his story. Sometimes we need to step away from the noise of the world to find our own voice. And when we stop worrying so much about pleasing others, about meeting external expectations, we discover a form of freedom that no one can take from us. What if everything we believe to be true is just a comfortable illusion? What if our relentless pursuit of certainty is actually the root of our anxiety? Michel de Montaigne did not seek absolute truths, and perhaps that is why he remains one of the freest philosophers in history. His most famous question, "What do I know?" was not just an act of intellectual humility, but an invitation to a new way of living. For him, tranquility was not found in having all the answers, but in learning to coexist with uncertainty. Since ancient times, philosophers have tried to define the best path to a fulfilling life. The Stoics advocated for self-control and acceptance of fate. The Epicureans believed that pleasure and simplicity were the keys to happiness. Montaigne, however, took a different approach. He was skeptical of any philosophy that promised definitive answers. Montaigne was influenced by skepticism, a philosophical tradition that questioned humanity's ability to attain absolute truths. To him, there was no single correct way to live, nor a single explanation for life. The world was an uncertain, fluid place, full of contradictions, and the true wise person was the one who learned to navigate this uncertainty without trying to reduce it to fixed formulas. This perspective sharply contrasts with the way many people live today. We are constantly searching for certainty. We want definitive answers to our problems, seek foolproof advice, and crave a roadmap to success, happiness, and recognition. But this obsession with control only makes us more anxious. Montaigne offers us a different proposition: to accept that we do not know everything and that it is okay not to know. He believed that the human mind is limited and fallible, and that our intellectual arrogance often leads to more suffering than benefit. In his essays, he humorously critiques the great intellectuals of his time, showing that, in the end, even the wisest among us are vulnerable to the same illusions and weaknesses as everyone else. He writes, "Our judgment is so fragile that most of the time it gets lost in the darkness. What is truth for one is error for another." This idea may be uncomfortable for some, but it is also liberating. If everything is uncertain, then we don't have to bear the burden of trying to have all the answers. If our opinions and beliefs can be wrong, then we can be lighter, more open to dialogue, more flexible in the face of life. Moreover, Montaigne believed that accepting uncertainty makes us less rigid, less dogmatic, and above all, more tolerant. He lived during a time of violent religious wars between Catholics and Protestants and realized that much of human suffering stemmed from our inability to accept that we might be wrong. By letting go of the illusion of certainty, Montaigne found something rare: true peace of mind. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, didn't need to defend his worldview as the only correct one, didn't need to cling to fixed beliefs that could become prisons. He simply observed, experimented, and learned without the need to reach a final conclusion. In the end, Montaigne teaches us that tranquility does not come from certainty, but from lightness in the face of uncertainty. When we stop worrying so much about being right, we can finally breathe. What would happen if, all of a sudden, you stopped worrying so much about what others think, if you no longer measured your worth by success or failure, if you accepted that life is uncertain and fluid, and that the real secret isn't about controlling everything, but about adapting? For Michel de Montaigne, life was not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. Montaigne learned this the hard way. He saw friends and family members die suddenly, battled illnesses, and survived an accident that nearly took his life. After all of that, he realized that existence is fragile and that excessive attachment to the future is a trap. That's why he decided to completely change his approach to life. He withdrew to the countryside, abandoned political ambitions, and began living in the present, writing and reflecting on the human condition without the pressure of achieving grand goals. But don't be mistaken. This doesn't mean that Montaigne advocated for a life of passivity or indifference. Quite the opposite. He was neither a fatalist who accepted everything without question, nor a nihilist who believed nothing mattered. What he proposed was something far more subtle and powerful: active detachment. He believed we should act, strive, and pursue what we want, but without becoming slaves to the outcome. In other words, we should do what is within our control, but without despairing if things don't turn out as expected. He wrote, "There is no favorable wind for those who do not know where they are going." That is the key: to have direction without becoming obsessed with the destination. Montaigne believed that those who learn to navigate life's unpredictability become lighter, wiser, and happier. After all, the more we try to control everything, the more we suffer when things inevitably slip beyond our control. If you look at your own life, you might realize that the moments when you felt the freest and happiest were those when you let go of excessive worry. It could have been when you decided to stop caring so much about other people's opinions, when you gave up trying to force a situation, or when you simply accepted things as they are. Montaigne reminds us that life happens in the present, and that often excessive attachment to the future prevents us from seeing the beauty of the now. He writes, "Whoever places their happiness in the future condemns themselves to eternal unhappiness." Does this mean we should give up our desires and ambitions? Number. It simply means we must learn to let go, to flow with life rather than fight against it. And paradoxically, when we do this, things start to unfold more naturally. The results come, not because we are obsessed with them, but because we stop putting so much pressure on ourselves. Montaigne teaches us that true freedom does not lie in conquering the world, but in conquering ourselves. And to do that, we must learn to live without attachment, with lightness, with curiosity, and with the willingness to accept what life brings our way. In the end, Montaigne's greatest lesson is simple. Stop trying to control everything and learn to live. But like everything that seems simple, this idea hides immense depth. After all, how can we truly let go of the need for certainty, success, and control? Montaigne doesn't offer us a magic formula or a single path. On the contrary, he invites us to experiment, to observe ourselves, and to accept our contradictions. To him, life is not a straight line, but a series of unexpected curves, and true wisdom lies in learning to navigate them without despair. He teaches us that the obsession with certainty only makes us more anxious, that the pursuit of recognition traps us, that the attempt to control everything pulls us away from what truly matters, and that, paradoxically, when we stop caring so much, results tend to come. That's because when we free ourselves from the need for approval, we begin to act more authentically. When we let go of the obsession with success, we become more creative and spontaneous. When we accept that life is uncertain, we finally find peace. Montaigne lived and died faithful to this philosophy. His final years were dedicated to writing, exploring his ideas and observing life as it is, without illusions, without pretensions, without masks. He understood that humanity's greatest mistake is taking itself too seriously, and that the secret to a fulfilling life isn't about seeking definitive answers, but about learning to ask the right questions. So let me ask you, what if from now on you started living without the weight of constant worry? What if you stopped trying to prove something to others? What if you simply accepted uncertainty and started living in the present? Perhaps like Montaigne, you'll discover that true freedom isn't about controlling the world, but about freeing yourself from yourself. If you've made it this far, it means that in some way, this conversation resonated with you, and that's something powerful. After all, we live in an era where we are constantly bombarded with information, demands, and expectations. Taking a moment to reflect on a different path, a lighter, freer path, is already a huge step. Michel de Montaigne teaches us that we don't need to have all the answers, that life doesn't have to be a constant battle to prove something to someone, that we can simply live, and that in itself is already a revolution. If this video made you think differently, let me know in the comments. Which part of Montaigne's philosophy resonated with you the most? Do you feel like you worry too much about things you can't control? What would your life be like if you could relax a little more and trust the flow of things? And of course, if you enjoy this kind of reflection, you already know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like. It helps me keep bringing content like this to you. Oh, and since we're talking about letting go and embracing freedom, there's another video on the screen that you might find interesting, but I won't tell you what it's about. You'll have to click to find out. Who knows? It might give you a new perspective as well. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the end, and I'll see you in the next video.